one of our best friends here at the Craftsmanship. He's come. This is his second time with us. He shared in the past about being awesome with JavaScript and how to take it seriously. And I think that was one of our greatest turnouts here. It was a really good talk. Also, he's here to talk to us tonight about social engineering for evil, not good.
Look at him.
Sorry. Anyways, so without further ado, Scott, thank you very much for being here.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. You'll note that I'm wearing a shirt that shows you how evil I am tonight. So, why are we here? I think we've all felt that there's a bit of a divide between the technology and the non-technology folks in the world. And there's frustrations on both sides, right? I mean, I don't know if you've seen that video online that's making the rounds of the guy being asked to do 7 red lines with transparent ink. Have you seen that video? No. Well, that's just an example of the frustrations that we as tech people have with the other side, right? And there's frustrations on the other side, too. But we're here because we are tech people, and I want to talk to you guys about how we can address this stuff. So this is the first Google image that comes up when you search for business. And it's kind of nauseatingly generic. But why is that image the first thing that comes up when we talk about business? Well, it's because business is about people, right? People actually matter. Your career is not about the technology as much as it is about your ability to make technology that matters for people, right? That's why the technology needs to be made. If you make technology in a vacuum, you'll do what I did twice now. I've made full projects that didn't make any money and needed to be shut down. Nobody enjoys that. And so I think it behooves all of us to understand a little bit more about this divide and make sure that the technology decisions we make, the things that we create, are better targeted. So you may be asking, why is this random guy up in front of me talking about this? I've talked to you about JavaScript before. Does that give me any license to talk through something a little bit more fuzzy? This is not a tech talk at all. Sorry, but I think it's important that we talk about it. So why me again? Well, I have kind of an interesting history. So you all know this guy. I'll say it, like I was essentially this guy in high school. I needed to take prescription drugs for my acne. I was called geek. I wasn't super happy, let's be honest. Like, it's not a good place to be when you feel like you're an outsider in that way. My family wasn't technical either. And I kind of got a guilt complex when I played video games, right? Because they're like, you should be outside. You should be outside playing it, in the sun. I was in California, and they just didn't understand why I needed to do what I needed to do, right? And so I actually ended up getting a job at HP in high school doing web development, and I kind of found my place, right? And it only got better when I went to college. But then Microsoft came to me, and I kind of became this guy, actually. I had been made fun of for being a geek before, but now because a Microsoft recruiter said, hey, you should be a program manager, I was now being called overhead. I actually, people said to me, developers said, hey, you're not doing any real work, right? You're just the overhead. And I think it's some sort of a record being insulted by both sides of this divide between the technical and the non-technical. Maybe you guys have experienced the same thing. I know it felt weird to me. I took a whole week off when I was at Microsoft to code. And I'm a project manager at Microsoft, but I needed to get back to the code. So I felt like it was unfair they were calling me overhead. But I took it upon myself as a challenge to try and figure people out a little bit more. The technology definitely came easy to me, but dealing with people didn't really. At Microsoft, I'm sure you guys all have an idea of what Microsoft people are like. At Microsoft, I got feedback on my review that I was abrasive. Okay, so you guys know what Microsoft people are like, right? I was called abrasive at Microsoft. So it was not easy. It wasn't something that came naturally to me, but I did decide I'm going to take this challenge on because I think that people are harder to deal with than code. Does anybody agree with that? It's kind of harder to deal with people than code. All right, so I want you to come with me on this challenge. I have some ideas about how to address it. So the first thing is I wanted to become a student of human behavior. I wanted to treat it like a skill that was to be learned. And I think you guys can do the same thing too, because we have the hardware as developers, all right? We are systematic, logical thinkers. Now, you may think that that makes it harder to deal with people because people aren't really rational, but we can think about entire systems, and we can understand how one change will affect a larger system, right? That's systematic, logical thinking. That applies with people as well, it turns out, and we'll talk about that. We debug big systems all the time, and that requires a very scientific mind. We're collecting data, we're theorizing about what that data means, and then we're testing that to see if our mental model is correct. We all have that story of maybe a whole week even of doing this, right? And you're updating your mental model with every revolution. You weren't right up front, but you had that tenacity, and you finally got it, right? You guys are familiar with that process. And we've tuned our intuition. You can look at code very quickly and tell if that's good or bad. There's this concept of smells. We talked about it here before. You have explicitly tuned that intuition by getting better at the code that you write and the code that you read. So I think we have all the skills that we need to tackle this challenge of people. So now let's talk about some basic building blocks. So the 3 C's of communication by Scott Nonnenberg. Here we go. First is clarity. We need to make sure we get the message across and that we get the right message when we're interacting with people. So you guys may be on top of this. This is actually a relatively easy one for devs because we're all about specifics. But let's talk about this quickly. So you want to define your terms when you're talking with people. Early on at Microsoft, people kept talking about Everett. Everett this, Everett that, Everett this. And I knew the area, and I thought, hey, they're talking about some team up in Everett probably, right? Like another team that's in that city that's working on stuff. Like a month later, I found out it was a code name for a product. It's a good idea to define terms. Summarizing with paraphrasing is a great tool for making sure that beyond the specific terms, you get the gist of the message. When somebody is talking to you, you can repeat back to them to make sure that you get very clearly what's happening. And then agreeing on specific next steps, going one step beyond the paraphrasing, you now both agree on what the outcome of your interaction should result in, right? And at Microsoft, I ran a lot of meetings, and sending meeting notes was crucial. Like, you hate to go back to a meeting or get the same group of people in a meeting room a month later, talk through the same thing, maybe come up with the same decision, maybe not, but it's frustrating. So sending out meeting notes is crucial. At Microsoft, I used to send out my agenda for the meeting and then have that up on the screen during the meeting and then take notes in line in my agenda and then send that out afterwards, right? So that was almost like real-time paraphrasing for everybody in the room. So again, clarity, that's the first C. So this is going to be a participatory talk. So our first exercise, but have any volunteers? Anybody want to raise their hand? Anybody? All right, we have one. Okay, I would like you to paraphrase this. I will read it for you. There will be an overall envelope of resources for operating costs that will be subject to a downward trajectory over time representing efficiency. Within that envelope, there will be very broad freedom to tailor pay and conditions to the requirements of the marketplace. Can you paraphrase that?
All right. We've got expenses. We want efficiency. You've got options.
I like it. Anybody else want to try?
Your budget's going to get smaller.
Uh-huh.
You can work within how we budget.
All right. Okay, I like that. Any others? Okay. I had the budget will go down over time because efficiency is getting better. I don't know if that's actually true, but within that budget, we can still play employee market rates. But yeah, being able to break through this stuff is pretty crucial. And again, you summarize back, and you can make sure you fully understand. I hate this kind of stuff, by the way. There's a whole website. If you pull down this slide deck, click on source. There's a site called weaselwords.com.au. It's pretty funny. All right, next. So confidence. Once we have the message being clearly transferred back and forth, you want to make sure that people take you seriously, right? That you project confidence. So the first thing that developers, including myself, have some trouble with is eye contact. And I understand it's difficult. I definitely still like to look off into the randomness as I'm talking to people. But, you can come back, right? You don't have to be always on. That's a little creepy. So, play with that. Again, pretty basic, but important still. The next is authority. And having a strong, even voice as you talk through things that are with people. Making sure that you have a presence when talking about something. You must believe in what you're talking about and project that. That's very important to people in the non-tech world. They read into any kind of non-authority body language and take points off your score effectively if you don't do this. So if you don't kind of get a feel for this easily, you might just pay attention to people who you think have authority around you and figure out what they do. You can either ape that, just do exactly what they do, or figure out what it is that maybe is giving them the authority. Because some companies, honestly, like your authority comes from how many years you've been there. So unfortunate, but true. And the next is posture. Laptops are bad, everybody. It's a sad, sad state, of course. But nobody should be like this all the time, right? And you have to do that when you're on a laptop, right? You literally cannot use a laptop with the right ergonomics, so I encourage you. I really, really encourage you. Don't use laptops for as much of your computing time as possible, because we're on computers 10 plus hours a day, more than that. Ergonomics are important. So let's do an exercise. All right, everybody? You ready to stand up? Okay. The next step is to put your shoulders back and down. Okay, and you're going to put your chest out a little bit. And you'll notice that when you do this, your back is going to be curved a little bit more than is comfortable. And so you can tilt your pelvis back a little bit. If you think about it like a bowl, you can tilt the pelvis back and straighten your back, right? And now we can hold this for a little bit. Anybody feel a little bit sore maybe in the middle of the back? Feel a little uncomfortable? I use a standing desk every day. I'm still bad with the standing. For how many years before I used my standing desk, I was doing the wrong thing. Go to any physical therapist, yoga instructor, massage therapist. They will tell you you have, maybe Microsoft neck was the term that I got when I first went to somebody like that. To this day, I still have problems. It's a long journey. But again, when we're talking, you can sit down if you want. Thank you. Thank you for participating, by the way. I appreciate that. I could do an entire talk on ergonomics and like health, but again, when we're talking about kind of points being taken away when people interact with you, kind of having that slumped look is that's going to take points away, right? You talk about authority and presence in a room, so having your chest out, shoulders back, and also your kind of arms out like this, as opposed to shoulders crossed. When your shoulders are crossed, that means that you're not open to new ideas, right? The very low level kind of animal brain body language thing. When you do this, you're not open to new ideas, right? When you're kind of crossing yourself, you're kind of protecting yourself, right? So the open I'm accepting of new things. So that's kind of uncomfortable, right? Nobody likes that stuff. But this one is even more important. So once we do have the right posture and we're taking authority, right? Presenting an authority presence, we have to make sure that we care about our recipient on our communication. When we talk to people, we have to make sure that we care about them. Why? Because I think this is why I was called abrasive at Microsoft. If you don't look like you're happy and welcoming and your face is kind of maybe a little worried looking or angry, and you try some of those things, it's not going to be good. You will kind of backfire because you're trying to do better, but your face can give you away, essentially. I think computer scientists are particularly bad actors. I mean, I think I'm a really bad actor as well. So what do? Work on the core reason. Why do you have the worried face? Why do you look kind of angry? Well, maybe because you're frustrated. Maybe because the person you're talking to said no when you were trying to convince them of something. Maybe they are stupid, right? Because they didn't make the same decision you did, and you clearly have all the facts. You have a very consistent, logical structure in your mind, and they obviously don't agree with that. They must be wrong. I therefore judge you. You are inconsistent. I judge you. I think we should stop that. It's a very common programmer thing. I've done it. I try to accept the world as it is, right? If you have a history of this kind of thing, it may be difficult to break through it. It'll take some time for people to trust you again. If you start this process towards being less judgmental and people have a history of you being judgmental to them, it'll take a while to break through that again. So this is another built-up habitual thing. You could switch jobs maybe. That would be easier in some cases. But this is something to work on. And anyway, it's not like your internal logical system is consistent anyway. I mean, you have some inconsistencies, don't you? Or you have a rock-solid, structural, painstakingly crafted, internally consistent system of belief, do you? Are you sure it's fully consistent? Are you sure that all your principles are proven? Maybe we shouldn't judge so much. And that goes to our next point, which is that you shouldn't preach. You want to influence based on what the person already cares about. When you appeal to an external authority, then people are just going to shut down, right? If you're talking to a business person and you say, well, it's because the Java blah, 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 blah. That's what they will hear. They don't care about any of that stuff. So you need to appeal to something that they care about, which is either, say the bottom line, or efficiency, or timelines, right? Speak the language, influence based on your understanding of what they need. Which brings us to the platinum rule. Has anybody heard of the platinum rule? Anybody? Okay, we have a few. Anybody heard of the golden rule? Yes? Okay, you should have heard of that. The platinum rule is one step harder than the golden rule. The golden rule is you do unto others what you would want to have done to yourself, right? The platinum rule is do to other people what they want. It's a little bit harder, right? Because we know what we want, right? That's easy. But knowing what they want, that's when it gets hard. It's hard to understand other people, right? We don't know what that is. For Christmas, I tried to reduce my stuff this year by asking for a story instead of a gift. I didn't like the fact that we're throwing things in the landfill, or I just don't need more things, right? And so I asked, I want a story from you guys, a 2-page story, something you learned. And it took a while, but I realized that I couldn't just tell people or give people what I wanted. AKA, I couldn't just give them stories because they'd be disappointed. They didn't ask for a story, right? But I mean, if you think about it, that's what you do all the time. And so I gave them the gift cards, right? And I was hoping on Christmas Day, hey, I'll get some stories. I got one story from my mom, and that was it. Everybody else gave me things. So yeah, it's very hard to do this. The platinum rule is extremely difficult. You have to understand the person well enough to give them what they want. Quick aside, anybody heard of this book? Yeah, only a few of you? Very interesting book because it's effectively the platinum rule. What you do is you ask a few questions to your partner, figure out what they want in terms of love expression, and then you give it to them, and all is happy in the world, right? In theory, right? But interesting to check out. It is the platinum rule. So we've thought, well, we need to give people what they want, platinum rule. We need to speak in their language. We need to influence instead of just trying to appeal to authority. So we have to understand these people. And, people, right? People. Well, you already interact with people on a daily basis, right? I just ask that you pay attention to your interactions. You already do this with code, right? You're already building it up an intuition based on all the data that you see, right? So, can you see this? Yell out what you think. Why is one side or the other better quality code?
More logging, more consistent spacing.
Okay, so very quickly he was able to pull that out. Anything else?
Variable naming.
All right, so I like that. Now, why do you think you were able to do that so quickly?
I've seen a lot of bad code.
There you go. All right, training your intuition. It turns out that you already do this for people. Anybody recognize what this is, who this is, and what part of the movie it is?
Indiana Jones.
Incorrect. This is Star Wars Episode 4, when Han Solo comes back and saves Luke from being shot down by Darth Vader at the end of the movie. Now, it may be a little difficult to remember back to your first time watching this movie. I know it is for me. I've probably seen it like 40 times or more. But it's a surprise that this smuggler comes back and participates in the battle, right? So you're already building up an intuitive sense of people's behavior, right? You're already building up what's normal behavior and what's not. So I'm just asking you to make it deliberate. So once you've started paying attention to the people's behavior around you, you're starting to develop that intuition. The next step is to verbalize it a little bit. So what do we do when we're debugging? We create a mental model, and it describes the system in our brain, and we use that to make decisions going forward. So let's build a mental model for a person. So we start basic and general, like what kind of person are they, right? And from there we can go further. What do they know? What don't they know? In the case of a business person at your job, they don't know anything about technology, so that's pretty crucial. What mindset might cause their current behavior? So we talked before about building this structure of logical, rational thought. My theory is that a lot of people actually do have a mostly consistent rational structure in their brain. It's just they have different core principles, say, and they have different life experiences, and that's why they do the things they do. So there's a mindset. There's knowledge that they have or knowledge that they don't have, right? And so we're trying to figure that out. We're trying to, when we see behavior, we're trying to figure out, well, what would make me do that? What is a logical reason for them to do that? And it goes back to like general. What are their goals, right? And what are their goals for this specific action? And I think for me, the larger context ends up being really crucial when I'm trying to understand people. You know, like in a job, what are their incentives? Why are they doing things the way they are in your job? Well, because their manager told them to do that, right? Or there's a deadline coming up, and that's why they're a little bit different than they usually behave, right? For example, like you're at a grocery store, somebody cuts in line. Why did they do it? Is it because they're an asshole? Or is it because maybe they have to like take their wife to the hospital, right? Like we can allow for that, can't we? It'll make us a little bit happier in life because we'll judge less. So, an exercise. Let's go back to Han Solo a little bit. I would like you to turn to a neighbor, find somebody, and take 2 minutes to figure out why Han Solo said, "I know," in response to Princess Leia when she said, "I love you," in The Empire Strikes Back. So I'm going to set a timer.
Confident guy. I mean,
I guess we do. They're always fighting. I'm thinking because when he gets off his fight, but then she doesn't fight with anybody else. Oh, why didn't you say that? Oh, Potentially, why didn't you just say? You just said. Yeah, he's hedging it. He said, okay, I got to do it. You're kind of. I like this. I think it's great.
Well, thank you for doing that, everybody. I appreciate it. Do we have any suggestions? Any thoughts?
He's kind of a dick.
Ooh, all right. So we went immediately to the asshole. Okay. Do we have anybody else?
I think he's afraid of commitment.
We have afraid of commitment. What's another?
Didn't want to reciprocate. Maybe he really didn't have any feelings for Leia.
Oh, okay, interesting. So maybe he was actually not that interested in her.
Well, what about him being disconnected? He's being frozen in carbonite. He might not come back. If he gets attached right now, that could be bad for his emotions.
Ah, okay. So prevent her from feeling pain. Okay, so that's good.
Opinion of Han Solo.
Okay, so there's some passion here. It's good, and I really appreciate that you spent the time to think about that. Let's get back to my screen. So this is a game that I think you can play all the time. I do it with my girlfriend, and I appreciate that she deals with me. But anytime a movie, TV show, a book, I really like to talk about, reason through, is that consistent behavior for the character? Is it consistent for the world? And then for an added level of difficulty, you can start thinking about what the biases of the writer potentially are. Who is the writer and why do they think this about that kind of person? And you can actually even do this with, say, public figures or historical figures. But again, an interesting game you can use to exercise this muscle. And really, this is a skill that we're building, right? So the more practice you can get, the better. You may have noticed that there are some biases, right? So some people immediately go to Han Solo is more of an ass, right? And there are some people that are like, oh, he's trying to save Leia pain, right? Your own biases are going to start showing through as you try to figure out what other people are doing. And you'll actually do that quite a lot. You'll be projecting onto other people, and that's why it's good to bring in others to talk through it. The more different the person is, the better you can learn from their perspective as you talk through this stuff. So imagine, you're not just hanging out with somebody technical, you're hanging out with somebody non-technical talking about this. Now, that would be a learning experience. But there's another way to learn on this front.
Just really quickly.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I didn't want to let that slip by. When you talk about perspectives, I think there's also the gender perspective.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think that was also important to know because there was some commonalities in terms of their responses which were dramatically juxtaposed from hers.
Absolutely.
And not meaning that anyone is bad or
No.
good or it's just different.
No, yeah, we're valuing perspectives here, right? There's definitely no bad or good. I love that you brought that up. And certainly everybody has a different way of looking at the world, and they have reasons for looking at the world the way they do, right? Absolutely. So we can talk about it. That's one way to figure out whether we have biases. Another is to actually test your assumptions. Now, obviously, we can't go question Han Solo, unfortunately. It would be cool because I'm pretty sure he's kind of a cool guy, maybe, or maybe he's not. I don't know. So the first thing is, sorry.
He actually explained it on thing on Red White.
Oh, did he? Han Solo.
Harrison Ford did.
Okay. All right. So we can go to the source material, but he was just the actor. He wasn't the writer, right? Okay. So when we're verifying our assumptions, the first thing you can do, say you're actually working with a coworker, the first thing you can do is make sure that you care about that person and you have the right kind of mindset as you approach this, okay? Because if you're approaching it kind of judgmentally. They will not answer your questions or be very happy with you as you ask these questions, okay? But the first and easiest question to ask is, say you have some assumptions about what they know or their larger context, right? Are there deadlines happening? Or did your manager ask you to do X? Or, is your job description to do X, right? So these are kind of yes-no questions, right? Relatively easy. You can go deeper, which is, how did you approach that problem, right? How did you think about solving that problem and thereby understand their thought processes a little bit deeper? You can also get more detail, right? So when you're talking with somebody and they mention something, you can just say, hey, tell me more about that, right? To understand how they think about it, what they know, and kind of dig in a little bit. And a lot of people, if you get them talking about what they are interested in, they'll be happy to answer that kind of question. You can also explore their own self-image, right? If they're really willing to talk to you, you could just say, well, hey, why did you do that thing, right? And they can tell you their own motivations for doing it. And a lot of people have a pretty good sense of why they're doing things and why they approach things in life. Others don't necessarily, or they have multiple levels, like deeper motivations, higher level motivations. So there are some questions you can use to dig past your ideal self-image. Say, you believe that you're like a really, fit, healthy person, and you say, yes, I'm a fit, healthy person, and then you ask them what they ate for lunch yesterday, right? So specific stories instead of hypotheticals. This gets past some of the ideals, right? And this is deeper questioning. I wouldn't recommend using it all the time. This is kind of a more advanced one, but I think it is valuable if you're, say, trying to understand your customers, right? We're all working for customers, right? That's why businesses exist. Understanding customers deeply enough such that you can solve their problems is like the foundation of entrepreneurship, right? Yeah.
Isn't this kind of my individual their privacy or personal space, like asking them questions that are, at what point do you think this can be done?
With friends out for a beer, you can go pretty far.
But what if that's not the case with some people?
I would say starting from the top and going down, you'll want to just kind of ease down the list. Start at the top, make sure you're comfortable with that, and then work down the list slowly. And apologize if somebody doesn't like it, right? But with technology, we're so willing to experiment. We're so willing to try something, see what happens, and then learn from it, right? What I want to build with this is a feedback system whereby we can learn more about the people around us. And fear of offending somebody, it's a great fear. I think just the fact that you're worried about that probably puts you in a good place, right?
This is what to do, but I'm just concerned that the question is, if someone did that to me, I would say, why are you asking this? I might.
Well, are you imagining an out-of-the-blue conversation or a conversation that progresses a little bit more naturally? Like, I just wonder about the scenario you're imagining.
I guess when I'm guilty about something I did and someone asks me about it, then I would feel that they're asking it because it's kind of a trick question.
Okay. So you're worried about somebody then judging you, or you're maybe not feeling so good about it, and so you don't want to have to talk about it any further, right? I honestly don't have any answer to that. Like, you can maybe detect discomfort. I mean, this is another like training your intuition, right? I mean, it sounds like you even understand or maybe have crossed this line before, so you know what it's about. And so I can't tell you anything other than without crossing the line, you'll never know where the line is.
One suggestion is always let them know they have an option of not answering.
Absolutely.
And make them feel comfortable.
Yeah, and when we go back to the caring and speaking their language and not being judgmental inside our brains so that we smile, this is really the key. You cannot do this without, by being a judgmental person that doesn't feel like this person in front of you is a valid person, right? If you project that, this will not work.
I guess the key to that is when you're asking people questions and explaining motivations or why they did stuff, you have to ask in a way that you're not asking them to defend it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. If you put them on the defensive, it's easy to do that if you ask aggressively.
Right.
You
Yeah.
get nowhere.
One thing that speaking of defensive, one of the things I find is very useful if somebody has already started to go towards defensive, is you can just tell a story of yourself in a similar situation, right? And when I was dealing with that, this is what I did, and I know that X, Y, and Z happened because of that. And you can kind of put yourself on the side of that person, right? And again, like, defensiveness is about feeling like you're not on the same side. The more you can prove that you are on their team, that you care about them, again, it goes back to the caring, the better. So that's a great question, great concern. Again, I would definitely not ask any of these like low-level questions out of the blue. Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper. So when you understand how somebody uses their money or their time, you understand their priorities a little bit better. And this is probably not the best kind of question for your manager, but a better question for a customer if you're looking to understand them better, right? To design features for them, to start even a new business, say. And then we go back to the clarity. So it's all very full circle. This is a cycle. When somebody says something to you, you can paraphrase back to make sure that you understand it properly and define terms, because other people have different terms for things than you do. Especially the fuzzier you get, the more high level you get, the more these terms are kind of fuzzy in people's minds. So you can say, tell me more about what that term means to you, or what do you mean by that? And that kind of makes sure that exchange you have is a productive one when you are asking these questions and digging deep. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that, yes, trust is super important, but asking these kinds of questions, the lower on the list you go, the more you want to do it one-on-one, because there's crosstalk involved. People's answers will interfere with each other. Say you're like dealing with customers in a focus group. The latest research on customer interviewing and understanding customers well says no focus groups. One-on-one is a lot better. Okay, so back to the exercises. Okay. We all love our code editors, right? We are almost religious about it. In fact, we are kind of judgmental about the code editors that we use, both ourselves and others. So I ask of you, find somebody who is not using the same code editor that you do. Suppress the judgment about why that is. I will set a timer. You will spend 1 minute to develop a non-judgmental mental model for why they made that decision. And then 90 seconds on each side, after you've built those mental models, to ask questions to further refine the mental model. So we're going to try and practice this with a kind of contentious topic. Any questions?
Well, to make this easier, how about we raise hands and call out?
All right. Okay, so anybody, you can barely see that, the new Visual Studio logo. Anybody use Visual Studio? Okay, so that'll help you. Anybody use Eclipse? IntelliJ? Xcode? Wow, okay, so we're like really spread out. This actually shouldn't be that hard. And then like Sublime Text, Vim. Okay, any others that I haven't mentioned that you're like mad that I didn't? Okay, we'll leave it at that, all right? Okay, so I'm going to set a timer. Find somebody unlike yourself. I will set a timer for the 1 minute, and you can introduce each other, and then you want to build a mental model for why they made that decision, okay? All right, let's start building the mental models, and you don't want to be talking.
Yeah, I guess so.
Who?
He obviously missed it.
You mean the guy in the blue shirt? Yeah. It's my friend Dan Rathwell. Same kind of hair, maybe. All right, how you guys feeling? Feeling good? You learn a lot? I don't see any bloodshed, which is good. I see some smiles even, which is even better. Means you're not judging too much. So, what did you discover? Anything interesting?
It sounds like if you use Visual Studio, it's mostly because you don't have a choice.
And you know what? That rings so true for me because I worked for Visual Studio for 8 years. So sad. Next. Anybody else? Anything? Emacs has a package manager. All right. I don't think I knew that either. Any others? You knew everything that you found? Yeah, you didn't learn anything new. All right. How about this? Did you discover any biases? Any things that you assumed, but then when you questioned, you discovered things were different than you expected them to be?
I assumed that Emacs had to be run out of the terminal.
Oh, okay. So what did you find out there? That's interesting.
That's not the case.
You can run it in like a window?
I guess so.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I have to say, like, when I asked the question of this fine man over here about why he used Visual Studio, I was correct in my initial mental model that he used it because his management forced him to. But that's why he uses Notepad++ sometimes, because then he doesn't have to suffer all the time, right? So that was an exercise of, at least this is what I was trying to get to happen. What you come up with an initial mental model. You, without judgment, I have to emphasize that over and over again, because we're so judgmental as a group of people, or tech people. Without judgment, ask questions, validate your assumptions, figure out if you are right or wrong. And what I believe...
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I'm just processing what you're saying. Because I realized that what happened in our conversation for me was we just fell into this really easy conversation about editors, and I completely forgot to form a mental model or do any of the exercises. We just keep talking, so.
Oh, that's great feedback, actually. It does have to be an explicit decision you make that as you are approaching these problems, it's a problem in the back of your mind. It's like a new subconscious routine, background process, always going. And yeah, like it's something you do have to spend some mental effort on, right? And you can't just go into situations and treat it like you always have if you want to try and use this system and experiment and learn.
One thing, though, is here when you're just trying to get a feel for why the other person uses whatever, that doesn't have the same tension as when you're in a work group and some people want to use two very different things and which may even cause the project to be structured differently. Whether oftentimes IDs want them to be structured a certain way, and the VI people are like, why do you want it even like that? That just makes more work for us to navigate. And so here we don't have that same push of one versus the other and the consequences to the other person.
Absolutely. High tension situations definitely make this harder. People are much more willing to fall over into the defensiveness, right? I think this needs to go back to acting like you care about that person's perspective, right? And influencing based on things they care about, right? This is the only way to convince people of anything, truly. You cannot appeal to external authorities. You have to talk in terms they care about and acknowledge that their goals are valid, right? That's kind of the fundamental thing here. And certainly when time is short and when tensions are high, that becomes radically more difficult. And I'm not saying this makes it easy, but I do think there's an approach here which, over time, you can get better at this and just make it kind of more natural. But conflict is conflict, Like there's only so much that you can do to smooth that out going forward, right? You're always going to have conflict.
When you say appeal to external authorities, do you mean refer to an external authority as the expert of why I'm right? Is that the idea you're getting?
I would say appealing to an external authority is really using anything that person you're talking to does not care about, that is not in their mental framework, to try and convince them of something, right? If it's not already in their mind, it's not already a goal of theirs, if it's not already something they believe or not, it's going to be so much harder to convince them of it, right? So you can imagine it as, I used this imagery earlier. You're building up this structure of logical connections, and you have like a bedrock of core principles and goals, and you build up from there. If somebody is so disparate from you, they're not even built on the same core bedrock, right? And they have their structure it doesn't share anything with yours, right? It's going to be radically harder to talk to them, because they don't share anything in common. Like terms may be even different, right? And that's why we go back to defining terms. So yeah, people are difficult. I mean, you talk about the hardest piece of software you've ever worked with. I mean, this is definitely about there or more, no doubt about it, right? It's more than one person can truly hold in their mind in the detail, but that's why we have methods of thinking about this that are a bit more high level. So I definitely appreciate the questions. It means you're taking it seriously. Yep.
So what about conflict situation where there is a limited resources or some credit will happen? Someone has to get credit for something. Those kind of situations, do you still, there's some conflicts of interest and competitive behavior in the workplace, right?
Right.
How do you deal with that situation?
I'd love to talk further about that. Sounds like a pretty tough situation. I think it goes back again to those bedrock core principles, like the motivations. Why are they doing what they're doing? It kind of sounds like you're saying that it's, they're purely in it for status and they want to kind of step on you on the way up or something like that. That's how are you going to deal with that, right? If you could somehow appeal to that side of them, you have to appeal to what they care about again. So let's talk about that after the fact. I mean, there are some really tough workplace situations, and I'd be happy to talk through them. So what do you do with this system? My thought is that you could use it as a feedback loop to improve your mind maps, your mental models for people over time, get used to workplace situations. Just get better over time. With technology, we are constantly experimenting, trying new things, and thinking about it. I don't think that anybody can get better, truly move forward in their career without having some handle on this stuff. What I've tried to do is present a system which you can use as a feedback loop for getting better over time. Next steps, some reading that I think is kind of interesting. If you pull down the slide deck, you can just click on these links. You can start integrating books about human behavior and psychology once you're thinking about this as something worth improving and worth spending time on. And what I did at Microsoft, man, I was I was dealing with teams, interacting with the division, interacting with a large-scale project. One of the projects I worked on when I was at Microsoft, the last thing was Visual Studio 2010 SP1. It was a 2,000-person project. I had to model teams of teams. What can I possibly do that can influence this? If I move this lever, what will happen? Thinking about emergent systems, steps down the line, right? Incentives, and how does that change things? This is what usability is fundamentally, understanding users. What are they trying to achieve? How can you make that easier for them? What are they used to? What's their history? If you're on Windows, they probably expect Windows paradigms, right? And then entrepreneurship, again, like this is the core of entrepreneurship. This is why I've geeked out about this so much. I started that process at Microsoft, designing features and then working on large-scale projects and then trying to start companies and understand users well enough to give them a product they would buy. I'm trying to get better at that one. It's hard. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, have any couple minutes for any more questions? Or?
Oh yeah, I have all the time in the world. Let's do this.
Cool.
Question.